All right, brother. So we're going to start tonight's show with current events. And I guess I should stop saying tonight because whoever's watching or listening to this may not be listening to it at night. But at least now y'all know we record at night. Um, so we're going to kick it off with the top financial stories of the week. And this one is actually geopolitical in nature. Russia has invaded Ukraine. They decided to, the way they framed it, they recognized two provinces in eastern Ukraine, decided to recognize them as independent political entities, and they've moved peacekeeping troops in, supposedly at the request of the locals. So we'll see how this goes, but Vladimir Putin and Russia have indeed moved into Ukraine. The impact of this is definitely going to be felt economically for a number of reasons. Number one, Russia is a tremendous exporter of energy. They export oil, they export natural gas. In fact, one of the things that I saw was the response of the German government. They have, at least for the time being, they have suspended the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which was basically a direct pipeline of natural gas from Russia into Germany.
Yep.
So that's going to impact energy prices throughout the world. You also have the impact on the food markets because Russia and Ukraine combined to produce something like 25% of the world's wheat crop. And that's a pretty substantial thing. So if there's a disruption in that market, that's going to see food prices have upward pressure. And then Russia is also a major supplier of palladium, which is a key element in the production of microchips. And as those of you who've been paying attention to the inflation situation know, the shortage of microchips has really devastated the auto market, which has just led to explosive growth in used car and new car prices there. So that's a big deal. So I'm sure you've been paying some attention to this story, Saki. What have you been thinking about the potential impact?
Well, I'll tell you what. It hits close to home, and I'll first and foremost I'll explain to our audience why. One of my children, my son, is in the military. He's in the Army, and he could potentially be deployed. His unit could be deployed as a result of all this. So obviously, that's something that is at the forefront of my mind personally. But I also want to take that opportunity to, obviously thank our men and women in uniform, right, in all forms and fashions of our military for the services they provide.
Absolutely.
And but moving on, Russia's a powerhouse, and they have a lot of influence in a lot of different sectors in our economy. It's one of the downsides when the world, ventures to become a global economy where they're so relying upon each other. When something happens like this, we're going to feel the fallout. So it's just hard to gauge what that's going to be at this point. You hope and pray that Russia doesn't go through and invade, but at this point, it's just unclear what's going to happen. It looks like they may. You're not sure if Ukraine's going to, get some happy feet and maybe initiate something on their end. So one of the biggest things I think of is market volatility on my end for me personally, and people's finances and business finances. And if Russia does decide to invade, you're gonna see a lot of wild swings in a pretty quick amount of time.
Well, and they've already put troops in a couple of the eastern provinces, so technically they've at least invaded some. It's not a full out invasion of the country, and I think that's that's where your point comes in, and is absolutely correct that, we're kind of waiting at this point to see, are they going to go further? Are they going to escalate this to the next level? How much is Ukraine going to sit back and take before they maybe punch back? There's a lot of unease right now because there's a lot of uncertainty about how this is going to play out, but everybody knows it's kind of a dangerous situation. Um, One of the interesting things, like you said, is the impact on what's now a global economy. So even though the United States, where we're based, we're not a major import and export partner with Russia directly. I mean, we are a partner. We exchange goods and services, but it's not like a significant portion of our economic performance is dependent on them or vice versa. But because of the globalized nature of things, for example, the energy disruption in Europe, well, that's going to lead to upward pressure on natural gas prices.
Yeah.
And there are an awful lot of folks in the United States during wintertime that rely on natural gas to heat their homes. The same can be said for oil. There are significant numbers of people in the States that use heating oil to heat their homes. And the price of crude right now is near $100 a barrel. And there's some speculation that it could go as high as $120 a barrel or higher. I want to say like 16 months ago, it was around $40 or $45 a barrel. So that's been an area where there's been significant inflation. And, you and I have talked about inflation in the past. One of the interesting things is that when you hear a news report, a lot of times they say, oh, well, the annualized rate of inflation is 7.5%. Okay, well, not everything inflates the same way over time. And one of the things that has inflated extremely quickly, much more significantly, is energy. I want to say energy prices are up 20 to 30% in most places in the United States now compared to a year ago. So that's a really big deal. What do people do about that? What if you're in a spot where you've got a difficult choice to make financially, to figure out how you're going to pay your energy bill and still put food on the table? What are some ways that you can make the ends meet?
Well, you have your obvious ways of, if it's in the winter like it is now and you have the heat on, turn that thermostat down a little bit. Instead of, if you're a family that keeps it at 71, 72 degrees, maybe put it at 69. Learn to live with it just a little bit cooler. Maybe get an extra blanket, put some sock warmers on, something. There's small steps you can do to cut back on your usage. One of the bigger things you could probably do, we touched on this before, is the vehicles you drive, right? I mean, if you've got a vehicle that guzzles gas at 10 to 12 miles a gallon, maybe it's time to look at something that could get you 25, 30, or even 40 miles a gallon. So they're out there. Maybe this is a good time. And here's an interesting side thought, kind of sidestepping that, or a byproduct of this, I guess you could say, is maybe this is the time for a family to think about getting away from fossil fuels and trying to help the environment better, maybe going to an electric vehicle or other items they can change. But those are a couple things that I would do real quick to cut down on the energy consumption.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Do you save money moving to electric? Because I know the cost of electricity is going up as well. But if you get more bang for the buck in terms of using electricity instead of using a petrochemical powered car, that might be a good way to go. I'd have to look into that a little further, but that's a really good idea. Um, one of the things that they talked about also was the potential impact on food prices. So,
Sure.
I know that that's been a situation now for a while, that has impacted my household. Really not so much because of our inability to go out to eat or anything like that. It's just because it's becoming so much more expensive that the decision uh, making has changed. The value for the dollar is less than it used to be when you go out
Yeah.
to eat, and it's
Yeah.
harder to justify long waits and not the greatest service and not the greatest food when your bill is 20% higher than it was a year ago or 2 years ago. So that's one thing. But I've noticed even grocery shopping. I don't know to what extent this is a national phenomenon, but I am having the hardest time finding spaghetti, uncooked spaghetti
Yeah.
noodles.
Yeah.
And I thought about that because when I was reading about Russia and Ukraine supplying something like 25% of the wheat in the world, obviously semolina wheat is what is used to make most pastas. And I've already had a hard time finding pasta noodles. And it may be something that's even harder to come by, but think about everything that wheat goes into, all the different bread products and pasta products and things like that. So,
Yeah.
um, that's something to be aware of. You may want to explore alternatives. We've been looking at things like rice pasta instead of wheat pasta.
Yeah.
And maybe if you've got a gluten allergy, you know about that sort of thing already, but but it's worth exploring alternatives. I mean, one of the cool things, at least about the way the world is right now, is we do have options. If one product gets really pricey, there's a chance that a different type of product may not be experiencing the same price inflation. So maybe that's something to look for, is how can you change one type of food into something comparable, but something that's less expensive, like moving from a wheat pasta to a rice pasta, or moving from maybe beef to a chicken or a pork product instead when you're looking at your proteins, because beef is getting pricey too.
Yeah. 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 It's
So
all getting pricey. Well, and I had an issue with elbow macaroni the other day. You were
yeah,
talking about spaghetti pasta. The shelves were empty. And that shows you how interconnected we all are, right? Any little disruption, whether it's Russia getting ready to invade or some truckers at the border, we see the impact of that very quickly in the way our society is now. So, unfortunately, that's kind of a downside of having a global economy and moving as fast as we do, that it shows you when it's a big machine and it's got to flow right nice and smooth, and when you get a cog in a wheel, it doesn't take long to feel the effects.
that's true. So I think the big takeaway from this is that there's going to continue to be pressure, inflationary pressure. We've talked about the underlying causes of inflation before, and things like monetary policy contribute to it. Um, Things like the supply chain issues, and this is where this particular story falls in. Is
Yeah.
it's going to be potentially a significant disruption in the supply chain. So even though the Federal Reserve is looking at taking some steps at um, changing the monetary policy and making the interest rates go up, and hopefully, pulling back a little bit on the monetary supply, um, that the effects of that could be offset by these disruptions in the supply chain. So it definitely is something that's going to bear, paying attention to how this plays out.
Yeah, and what I'd like to reiterate to our listeners is not to overreact. Don't jump into a decision, whether it's personal, finance, business, anything, without analyzing it. It's even more important in times like this. Disruption is a good word, and that's what we're going to see. And you're going to see unsteadiness, volatility everywhere.
Yeah.
Another key word is perception, right? Even if Russia doesn't go through, what Wall Street or all our so-called experts and everybody else, what they perceive is going to affect the markets as well, and the prices of some of our goods. So just pay attention, and it's more important now than ever just to have knowledge and be prepared, and don't make a rash choice.
That's an excellent point, and I'd like to build on that just for a moment. This is the Purposeful Podcast, and what we want to do, kind of the reason for being for us, is we want to help people achieve financial goals and live in such a way that they're able to pursue things that are meaningful in their lives. And that includes your relationships, your families, that includes whatever your goals and dreams are, like going to outer space. It's going to be different for everybody.
Yeah.
But what's important to you at a fundamental level. And in tumultuous times like these, it's that much more important that you keep your eyes on the prize, and that you don't lose focus and panic, because having that goal, having that aim, having that dream, and working through whatever obstacle that may come, that's what's going to carry you through and get you to the other side of this. And hopefully it won't be super painful on the way, but whatever struggles and obstacles you face, that's going to give you what you need to get through it. I think it's good to remember that.
I agree. Well said.
The Purposeful Podcast.